Hail to the Emperor! I am back with some of that sweet, juicy YouTube content y'all love so much. Now before I get started, I would like to say thank you for 5K subscribers. It has been a long and perilous journey, but you guys make it all worthwhile. So I want to take the time out of my day to thank each and every one of you, and I hope to have your continued support in my future endeavors. I also want to take this time to apologize to y'all, because I know I said I was going to make this video a long time ago, but things got complicated here in life, and unfortunately I just wasn't able to deliver on that promise, so I do apologize for having y'all wait this long. But anyway, that being said, welcome back to the Adaptation Station, a segment on my channel where I compare pieces of media to their source material counterparts. And today we are going to be looking at The Boys, Season 1 and 2. Now I have a bit of a confession to make. I had a hard time figuring out how I was going to do this one, considering the fact that The Boys show is drastically different from how The Boys is portrayed in the comic book. They do give a wink to the comics every once in a while when it comes to the show, and the premise is for the most part the same, but the way they go about it in the show is completely different from the way it goes about in the comic book. On top of that, The Boys has already gone through 2 whole seasons before I even started my YouTube gig, so I had a choice to make. Either I could tackle these seasons one at a time and give you guys smaller videos, or do them both at the same time and give you all one big video, and I chose the latter due to how different the show is from the source material. I think it'll just make it easier on everybody at this point. So The Boys is a comic book written by Garth Ennis. Sometimes I call him Guinness, mainly because it's easier to remember and I like the beer. But anyway, The Boys started in 2006 and ended in 2012. In the world of the comics, superheroes exist and they are treated like celebrities. Most everybody loves them, most everybody wants to be them. They're overseen by Vought American, which is basically the Boys' equivalent of Disney. They're a money-hungry and evil corporation and are responsible for the chemical known as Compound V, the thing that gives the superheroes their powers. Much like celebrities in real life, most superheroes are not good people behind the scenes. The majority of them don't give a damn about human life at all, and only really care about furthering their own agendas, as they feel that their powers and abilities make them superior to normal human beings. That's where the Boys come in. When the superheroes get out of line, the Boys are there to straighten them out. Now we'll get into the how and the why as we go further on into the video, but for now let me give you a brief background on me and The Boys. So during the first season I had no idea what The Boys was. I didn't know it was a comic or anything like that, but people kept talking about this show on Amazon Prime and I was like, okay, I guess I'll see what all the hype's about. And when I watched the first season, it always felt like something was missing, so I did more research on it and found out that it's an adaptation to The Boys comic book, something that I was at the time unaware existed. So I went back and reread all the issues of the comic book before the second season hit, and then I was like, okay, things are making a bit more sense now. And the comic is pretty damn solid, I'm not gonna lie. It's not the best thing I've ever read, but if you're looking for something different from your traditional Marvel or DC, I would recommend it. But anyway, I've read the book, I've seen the show, I've seen both seasons, and let me just say, if you are looking for somebody to gush all over this show, let me tell you something, man, I am not your guy. The show, in my humble and correct opinion, is overhyped garbage. Unlike the comic book, the storytelling is sloppy, the characters are uninteresting, the comedy is a fail, but wait, they added an extra ingredient to the concoction: chemical woke. So I think it's about time I got into the meat and potatoes of the subject, so let's get into talking about the characters and how I feel that the show does them a disservice. Starting with wee Huey and Billy Butcher. So Huey is the newest member of The Boys, who acts as the fish out of water character, so we get a lot of exposition through him because he asks the questions that us on the outside looking in would ask. In short, Huey is basically the everyday average person being flung into these fantastical situations with the boys and the superheroes, and because of that, the story feels a bit more tangible and grounded, but I don't feel that way with Huey in the show. In the show, Huey feels like a glorified extra who is only there for comedic purposes. And that's not me saying that Huey in the comics eventually became this maxed out level badass by the end of the series, but he does feel like a genuine person, and he does feel like he has somewhat of a stake in the story, albeit a very, very small one. I have a hard time taking Huey in the show seriously because most of the time it feels like he's just ad-libbing his lines for the sake of trying to be funny and awkward. Also, Huey's only with the boys because he kind of has to be, as opposed to it being his choice to stay with the boys like it was in the comic. In the comics, Billy Butcher, getting into him a little bit now, constantly tests and manipulates Huey into staying with the boys because 1, the boys need all the help they can get, even if Huey is not the most ideal candidate, and 2, Huey reminds Butcher a lot of his little brother Lenny, who had passed away some time ago, and so he keeps him bossing around. Now, moving over to Butcher, he is the leader of the boys. His backstory is for the most part the same, but with a few differences. You see, in the comics, Butcher has an extreme hatred for all superheroes because of how Homelander supposedly raped his wife, which led to her subsequent death. In the show, things play out similarly, only after being sexually assaulted, Becca doesn't die, she just goes missing. The reason I bring this up is because despite this very crucial change, they still want Butcher to play the same role that he did in the comic, despite the fact that he would most likely make finding Becca his main priority over taking down the Supes. Granted, he was recruited by Mallory, same as the rest, but it's still something he could do on his own time. At least try to put some effort into it, but no, just gonna hunt superheroes. They also try to make Butcher feel every bit as bad as how he is in the comic, but I just don't feel it with this guy. He comes across as a tougher looking Jack Sparrow if anything, but not Billy Butcher. Billy Butcher in the comics is tactically smart, rarely going into a situation without a plan, but this version of Billy Butcher seems to just fly off the seat of his pants. I don't know if they were trying to make him more of a realistic guy, but this just doesn't work for me. Also, going back to the relationship between Huey and Butcher, it never once feels like Butcher cares about Huey like a little brother. It just feels like he's kind of forced to tolerate him and therefore he does. At least not until the plot demands that he does care about Huey in that way. But up until episode, I think like 3 or 4 of the second season, you never really get that vibe. But anyway, let's talk about Frenchie and the Female because boy do I feel like they fucked these two characters up. So Frenchie and the Female have a pretty solid relationship in the boys' comics, having known each other for years. They're described to us as being the muscle of the boys, being the two toughest members on the team. And I can't really get into talking about the female proper without going into her backstory, so here we go. So the Female has no real name in the comic book, she is simply referred to as the Female. She was exposed to Compound V, the chemical that gives the superheroes their superpowers, as a baby. Since then, she's had an insatiable lust for gore and violence, one of her favorite things being taking somebody's face straight off. She also doesn't like to be touched, as she will viciously attack you for doing so, even if it's in a friendly manner like say a handshake. The Female doesn't speak, and unlike in the show, she doesn't use any type of sign language to communicate. She'll usually make some sort of gesture to let you know what she's thinking or feeling at the time. And I guess technically speaking, she can speak in the realm of the comics, but chooses not to for one reason or another. She had a pretty rough time growing up because due to the Compound V in her system, as well as her killing the doctor who invented this particular brand of Compound V, she would be captured and experimented on, only for her to escape, only for her to be recaptured and experimented on again, only for her to escape again, and rinse and repeat. One time she escapes and she kills a whole SWAT team that was sent after her, but after this she is discovered by the boys who take her in, and Frenchie takes it upon himself to kind of rehabilitate the Female, treating her more like a person and less like a weapon. Now Frenchie's comic book origin isn't nearly as detrimental to the show, so I'm not going to go over it, but the reason why I bring up the Females is because I feel like they missed the mark when it came to her character. Like, they do all these things to try to humanize the Female in the boys' show, like giving her a name, Kimiko, giving her a brother, having her do sign language as a means to talk to people. But here's my problem with all that. You're humanizing a character whose whole character arc is around her being dehumanized. Like, over the course of the comics, you can tell that the Female is slowly but surely making progress, becoming more and more human and less vicious. In the show, however, she seems to be over her ravenous side much more quickly, and it really just comes down to the language barrier when it comes to this version of the Female. Heck, she doesn't even mind it when people are touching her, even her touching other people, so long as they don't try to get uberly personal like Frenchie tried to get. And man, speaking of Frenchie, let's talk about this massive simp. So Frenchie seems like he is constantly down to fuck when it comes to the Female in this show. Like, he wants to help her out like he helped her out in the comics, but again, in this iteration, it doesn't seem like the Female really needs help reconnecting as a human being. It's just communicating with her that's the problem. And with Frenchie trying to constantly help her out the way that he's doing in the show, it feels more like he's just simping for her than actually trying to help her. Now in the comic, Frenchie does eventually admit that he does in fact have feelings for the Female, but that seemed to come secondary to him just wanting to be a genuinely good person and show her basic compassion and help her reconnect with her humanity. Now the show tries to justify Frenchie being so helpful to the Female by saying that Frenchie feels that if he can help her out, it'll atone for him not keeping an eye on Lamplighter the night he burned Mallory's grandchildren to death. But I just don't buy it. I mean, the Female does not struggle with the same problems that she has in the comic book. She's a grown woman who is capable incapable of handling herself. Frenchie just wants some ass, that's it. Which I really don't get because you got a much hotter looking chick in Cherise, so what the fuck, Frenchie? Mother's milk. How do I even begin talking about this guy? Well, for starters, you're probably wondering why he's called Mother's Milk. It all goes into his origin story, which is referenced in the show but isn't properly explained. Luckily, I'm here to fill in the gaps. So back in the day, MM's mom worked in a factory where she would make dog food. Unfortunately for her, this facility was originally used by Vought American for their experiments with Compound V, and the place wasn't properly sanitized before it was transitioned over into the dog food factory. As a result, the people that were working there got infected, Mother's Milk's mom being among them. And at first it seems like it's no big deal for her. That is until she meets MM's father and they have Mother's Milk and his brother Michael. And again, due to their mom being exposed to some level of Compound V when she was working in the dog food factory, this affected both of them in different ways. MM's brother Michael came out mentally retarded, while Mother's Milk cannot go for an extensive amount of time without drinking his mother's breast milk, because if he does, he will shrivel up and eventually die. And so he has to drink it periodically, hence why his name is Mother's Milk. Now in the show, at the beginning they originally claimed that his name was in fact Mother's Milk, but then later on it seemed like they just changed it to Marvin Milk, I guess as a means to make it sound more like a name that somebody would actually have, which I wouldn't mind this change had they not confirmed that his name is in fact Mother's Milk early on in the series. Like, Butcher introduces him as Mother's Milk without a hint of sarcasm in his voice, and then Mother's Milk himself confirms that that is his name when Huey is like, really? That's your name? So I feel like the whole Marvin thing was just something that the producers came up with halfway through production of the show. Also, an upside to Mother's Milk drinking his, Mother's Milk is that he gains super strength and durability. In the show, it appears that he has no powers, but it could be possible that he still needs to drink his mother's milk in order to live. Beyond that, he seems to play the same role that he does in the comics, that being a lot of investigative work for the boys. Susan Rayner is the director of the CIA, and is how the boys get their backing when it comes to taking down various superheroes. So she gives them intel, CIA credentials, and an off-the-books budget to operate on. This is due to the fact that Dakota Bob, the president at the time in the comics, does not like the idea of superheroes or Vought American. In the comics, while she is reluctant to work with Billy Butcher, she understands that he's a guy that can get the job done. Whereas in the show, she doesn't really want anything to do with Butcher at all. That is until Butcher brings some damning evidence against Vought American. Also in the comics, Butcher and Rayner have a sexual relationship, but it's not in a I secretly have feelings for you type of way. They just use each other to get it out of their system. They do reference this in the show, but they also make it seem like a little more was happening than just sex. So I don't get what's up there, but okay. Also, Susan lives all throughout the run of the boys. Like, she isn't a character that dies, whereas in the show, she bites the bullet pretty damn hard. Well, it's time to get into the gender swap characters, so here we go. Victoria Neuman. So the character of Victor Neuman, or Vic the Veep, as he's called in the comics, is the vice president in The Boys, but is also a Vought American tool. Because by having Vic the Veep as vice president, Vought American are one step away from putting superheroes in national defense. Now, Victoria Neuman in the show is seemingly against Vought American and the superheroes, only to be revealed as a supe herself and killing people as a way to better her campaign. I don't quite understand what they're doing with her yet, outside of making her a clone for AOC. So we'll just have to wait and see on that. Grace Mallory. Not Greg, Grace. So in the comic book, Greg Mallory is responsible for the formation of the boys. Him and Butcher would often bicker about how to do things in the boys when it came to the superheroes. Butcher wanted to take a more hands-on approach, while Greg Mallory wanted to take a more roundabout approach. And one day, the boys are given photos by an anonymous source of what appears to be Homelander just straight up mutilating people, including babies, for his own amusement. They also know about the 9/11 incident in which the Seven, primarily Homelander, completely screwed up when it came to saving the people from the hijacking. And so, Butcher finally convinces Mallory to use these two pieces of irrefutable evidence against Homelander, and Vought American will be forced to give him up, and possibly even just straight out kill him. Now, this doesn't go as planned and ends with Lamplighter brutally burning Greg Mallory's grandchildren to death. This leading to a ceasefire between the boys and the Seven, as well as the boys disbanding and Mallory going into retirement. Similar events happen on the show, just with a woman instead of a man, Stan, and they don't have evidence to take down Homelander directly, and instead are blackmailing Lamplighter into spying on the Seven for them, which of course plays out similarly to how it did in the comic. Madeline Stillwell and Stan Edgar. Now this is something of a unique situation right here, because while they do have the namesakes of characters from the comics, they're completely different characters in the show, yet play the roles of different characters from the comic. Let me explain here. There is a character by the name of Stan Edgar in the Boys comic book, but he dies off screen of a heart attack, and then later on, the character of James Stillwell takes over for the Vought American Company. And while there isn't a character by the name of James Stillwell in the show, there is Madeline Stillwell, who I guess is supposed to be a replacement for James Stillwell. But the thing is, Stan Edgar of the show acts more like James Stillwell than Madeline Stillwell does, being a calm and collected businessman who will do whatever it takes to make a profit, as well as being one of the very few characters who's not willing to put up with Homelander's bullshit. Now, Madeline Stillwell acts more like Jessica Bradley from the comics, who is an up-and-coming member of the Vought American Company, hired by James Stillwell to become the fall guy after Compound V is revealed to the public as the source of the suit's powers. They do something similar with Madeline Stillwell on the show after she's dead, blaming the whole thing on her as a means to save face for the company. Alright, now let's get into talking about the Seven, the parody Justice League team that are led by Homelander and run by Vought. Starting with Annie January, aka Starlight. So Starlight is like that one person in Hollywood who finally gets their big break, and at first believes that, oh man, this is gonna be so amazing, only to find out that the grass is not greener on the other side. In fact, it's quite murky and shitty and just overall sucks. Now, she's portrayed similarly on the show as she was in the comics, only in the show they're making her out to have a more proactive role in the overarching story of the boys. Because in the original source material, Starlight is not a super important character outside of letting us know how the Seven are in front of the camera versus how they act when they're not in the public eye, as well as dating Huey. And that's about it. Also, Annie kind of received her own nerfs and buffs for the sake of the show. Like in the comic book, she was able to fly, as well as emit a blinding light from her body, and that's it, that's all she can do. Now in the TV series, while they did take away her power of flight, they did add in that she can discharge energy from her hands, as well as super strength. And then in season 2, they nerf her again by saying that she can only use her Starlight powers through means of electricity somehow. Again, something that I will have to talk about later on. Okay, so Translucent is not a character from the comics, he's a show original character, taking the place of the comic book character Jack from Jupiter. And while Jack is not in the show, he does have a cameo appearance in The Boys Presents Diabolical, and they do reference him when Huey and Lamplighter are looking at porn. Now I'm not gonna bother showing y'all the scene, but my comic book readers know that Jack was into some, let's just say, very interesting kinks. It's also worth noting that Jack from Jupiter and Translucent share a similar ability where they can both become invulnerable, Jack by saying his magic word Carpo, and Translucent by becoming invisible. And there really isn't much to say about Translucent beyond that, because he's only in the show for a handful of episodes before he just up and dies. So A-Train is a character that got something of a rework for the show. In both iterations of The Boys, yes, he is responsible for killing Huey's girlfriend, and inadvertently having Huey meet up with Becca Butcher, but that's all these two versions have in common. Aside from that, in the comics, A-Train doesn't really play much of a role in the story outside of just being an asshole, whereas in the show, it seems like they're trying to give him some sort of storyline where he's using Compound V as a performance enhancer, and having him struggle to stay in the Seven. The showrunners have also opted to give him a brother, I guess to give him a more family dynamic, though it's really hard for me to care about it when we don't get to see a lot of it, so yeah. Now I found it really funny when the Deep was talking about how he's the diversity hire, because in the comic book, surprise surprise, the Deep was actually black. Yeah, the one time they could have justifiably used somebody who was black, they decided to whitewash him, which granted I'll give you that the Deep in terms of the comics is one of the most irrelevant characters ever made. But still, the people that have followed me for this long know how I feel about race swapping, and this is no exception simply because they went from black to white. Though I do feel like there is a specific reason for why they did make this change, though I will talk about that later on. Now, the Deep in the show I feel like is supposed to be satire for how non-comic book readers believe Aquaman to be. Like, you talk to a non-comic book reader about somebody like Aquaman, they're gonna be like, oh, well, he's just the fish guy. There's nothing special about him, whereas comic book readers know that that is far from the truth. However, in the show, that is essentially who the Deep is, a guy who can swim underwater and talk to fish. And they try to use that for the sake of comedy, though it never comes off as funny to me. And so it feels like the Deep is a guy guy who's just kind of there. Queen Maeve, I feel, is done a disservice by the show because in the comic book, Queen Maeve is something of a drunken bitch because she's got crippling depression due to all the bullshit she has to put up with being in the 7 as well as the 9/11 incident. The 9/11 incident really left a number on her. After being with the 7 for some time, Maeve gets fed up with Homelander's bullshit and gets in touch with the boys and essentially becomes their man on the inside, or woman in this case, as a means for the boys to get information on the 7 that they can eventually use to take them down. She comes across as uncaring and unfeeling towards everything, except for Starlight, who she does eventually, at the very least, tolerate, most likely because she sees a lot of herself in her. In the show, we're introduced to Queen Maeve being something of a standoffish bitch, but not necessarily a character who's depressed or wants to live inside herself. It's only after the incident with the plane that she does start to become depressed, and even then, half the time she's okay, but after she gets dumped by her girlfriend, that's when they really want to try to turn her into the character that we knew her to be from the comic. I guess the thing is with me, things feel rushed in order to get her to be more comic book accurate. Like, I guess you can say for season 1 it wasn't too bad, but in season 2, after she gets dumped by Elena, she just wants to drink, which Queen Maeve always seemed like she liked drinking, so there's that. She's sleeping around with all these dudes, and I guess she's helping the boys out now when it comes to Homelander. And yeah, these things do happen in the comics, but there's more of a natural progression there than there is here. Like, she gets dumped and then she just wants to whore around with whoever. Her depression is so crippling that she doesn't want to help Starlight at all, and then suddenly just shows up out of nowhere to help out Starlight. I mean, Queen Maeve was probably one of the better characters y'all had on the show, and y'all just running her into the ground for the sake of character development, I guess? I mean, if this is supposed to be like for character development, it seems like a rather ass-backwards way to do it. Also, one thing I want you guys to keep in mind is that Queen Maeve, unlike in the comics, cannot fly. Just keep that in mind because that will be on the test. Stormfront, or as I'm gonna call her, Femfront, because, believe it or not, Stormfront in the comic books was actually a man. What a twist. Stormfront was created in Nazi Germany and was one of the first people to have Compound V put into their system. He was later brought over to America to work for All American, and his DNA was what was used to create the Homelander. Besides the gender swap, there's quite a few differences between Stormfront in the show and in the comic. For example, in the show, it is not stated that Stormfront's DNA is what was used to help create Homelander. Stormfront also never had a sexual relationship with Homelander in the comics, but he did have one with Queen Maeve, but then again, who didn't? Stormfront in the show also discharges electricity from her hands instead of from her mouth like Stormfront did in the comic. Stormfront's agenda in the show also differs from how it was in the comic as well. In the comic book, Stormfront is known as the second best superhero in the world next to Homelander, and his goal is to become the #1 hero with his team Payback, a parody of the Avengers. Whether or not Stormfront has a secret agenda beyond that is never made clear, but that was his goal prior to his death. In the show, Stormfront's goal seems to be essentially world domination, with superheroes being the ones to reign supreme. Now, she does mention that she wants Homelander to lead them, and I don't know if that's the showrunners pivoting on Stormfront's character, because in the beginning she was very antagonistic towards Homelander, and the showrunners made it clear that Stormfront got gender swapped because they wanted a strong, powerful woman who would challenge Homelander and not put up with his shit, but she's quick to bow down to him too, and not just in terms of power dynamic. So again, I don't get what they were trying to do there, because if your goal was to put those two together, then why was she being so snarky with him at the beginning? I just don't get it. Like, it wasn't a natural development, it felt more like a 180. Homelander and Black Noir. So Homelander is the Superman-esque leader of the 7. He runs the team with an iron fist and threatens to kill anyone who gets out of line. Throughout the run of the comics, Homelander is known for doing some truly atrocious things, such as the sexual assault on Butcher's wife and brutally murdering people. These are things that Homelander has no recollection of. However, because there is supposedly irrefutable proof that he did in fact commit these acts of aggression, he forms this identity crisis where he believes that maybe he is just meant to be the bad guy and doesn't realize it. And so, in the penultimate arc of The Boys, Homelander leads a coup on the White House with multiple other superheroes in an attempt to take over the United States. And it's here we discover that Homelander did not in fact sexually assault Butcher's wife, nor did he monstrously kill all all those people in the photos, but rather this was all a ploy set up by Black Noir, who is revealed to be Homelander's much stronger and more durable clone, put on the team to kill Homelander should he ever get out of line. The problem is, Black Noir killing Homelander was his only real purpose in life. However, Vought American never gave the kill order, and so Black Noir took matters into his own hands by trying to frame Homelander to be this maliciously evil guy, so that he could finally kill him and fulfill his purpose. In the show, however, things are drastically different. For starters, the person playing Black Noir is African American, so it doesn't seem like they're going to go with the plot twist ending of it being Homelander's twisted clone behind the mask. However, I would like to say that it has been stated that Black Noir in the show is faster than a car. He has super durability and super strength. So maybe they'll do some variant of this twist, but only time will tell. I mean, after all, it doesn't look like Black Noir has any sinister purpose, at least as far as Homelander is concerned. Like, it doesn't look like he's trying to set the dude up or anything. In fact, Homelander seems to be suffering of his own worst enemy, because it seems like, due to him having such a bad upbringing and lack of love and affection that he received as a child, this version of Homelander is turning into a complete psychopath, who will lash out and do his own thing, and sometimes it works for him, sometimes it doesn't. Now, the twist that Black Noir was technically the main villain of the boys all along didn't sit well with everyone who read the comic, and so I feel like in the show they're trying their hardest to say that Homelander actually is the main bad guy, and any and all things that he did, he actually did do of his own accord, such as raping Becca Butcher. So we'll see how it goes, I guess. But anyway, with the characters out of the way, let's move on to adaptation accuracy. This probably won't be that long due to the fact that there is so much different with this show. But anyway, Huey Campbell's girlfriend getting inadvertently killed by A-Train, leading to him meeting Billy Butcher and joining up with the boys. Starlight being indoctrinated into the Seven and treating it like it's a dream come true, only to find out that everything is not as it seems, and being forced to perform oral sex as a means to stay on the team. Butcher getting the boys back together as the team was disbanded for a while after the incident with Mallory. The boys discovering the female and getting her to calm the fuck down with knockout gas. Huey and Starlight meeting at a park bench to talk about one another's shitty situations. Huey and Starlight forming a relationship. Homelander letting a plane full of people die. Starlight being forced to speak at the Christian event Believe, despite the fact that she's starting to lose her faith. Compound B being the chemical that gives regular people superpowers. Starlight starting to stand up for herself. Compound V being exposed to the public, with people realizing that superheroes are made, not born. Lamplighter killing Mallory's grandchildren. Becca Butcher being raped, causing her to have a superpowered child that claws its way out of her room and technically kills her? We'll come back to that. A fight with Stormfront. Homelander becoming more and more psychotic. Homelander being blackmailed into submission. The boys receiving government backing as a means to combat the Supes. Mind-blowing developments. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I told you guys it was going to be short, so now let's get into the fun part of the video. The criticism. Let me start off small real quick and talk about the comedy of the show. I don't know what they're going for with their version of comedy, but it's just not working. Like, there was one scene where A-Train is at a children's hospital where the kid has cancer and he's asking, where's Translucent? That's the one I wanted to be here, not you. Like, that's the only thing I wanted. And it's an awkward situation, and I feel like the showrunners think that it's funny because it's awkward, but it's not. It's just very uncomfortable, and if that was their goal, congratulations, you succeeded. But the thing is, it's not a plot thread, nor does it make the world feel more real, so clearly it's made to be hilarious, but it isn't. It's just dumb for the sake of being dumb. Another example is when Frenchie and Mother's Milk are arguing, and Butcher tries to dissuade the argument by comparing them to the Spice Girls, and that's why they need to stick together. First off, who the fuck remembers Spice Girls? Like, I kid you not, I completely forgot about them until Butcher mentioned them in this show. And the thing is, he could have compared them to any other pop group, and it would have had the exact same effect. Again, it's not funny, it's just odd. One thing that does kill me though is the running gag that Starlight is way out of Huey's league. Now don't get me wrong, she is a couple of notches above him, I'll give him that, but it's not like she's leaps and bounds above him, you know what I mean? Like, this isn't the equivalency of a 2 dating a 10, this is the equivalency of a 2 dating at best a 5. Like guys, the show is painstakingly unfunny. Like it makes modern day MCU humor feel like the comedy club. But anyway, now that kind of warmed up, let's really dig into the asshole of this show. So for starters, while watching the show, you probably thought to yourself, it is absurd that a ragtag group of people with no superpowers whatsoever would try to take on people who do have superpowers and could very easily kill them. So how in the hell does that work? The show chooses not to answer this question because it's too difficult of a question to answer, but the comic book, however, does in fact answer it. And the secret is Compound V. Every member of the boys has taken Compound V through some means or another. For Frenchie, Butcher, Huey, and Mallory, each of these characters have been given a refined version of Compound V that doesn't give them super comic booky powers, like being able to set things on fire with your mind or running at super speed, but rather it works similarly to how the super soldier serum works in Marvel Comics. You get enhanced strength, speed, and durability, and even a bit of longevity. The females in Mother's Milk's powers work in a similar way despite the fact that they got Compound V through different means. So when the boys go out to take care of superheroes in one way or another, these supes that they go up against are unaware that the boys are on Compound V. So to them, the boys look like ordinary people that are just being really stupid when in fact they are actually quite clever. I know in the third season they are going to get the Compound V, but we'll cross that bridge when the time comes. For now, just looking at these 2 seasons alone, it does look like the boys just come in and do their thing and get extremely lucky. Granted, I will say that quite a few times in the boys comic, taking down a supe really is as easy as doing this one thing. So for example, there's a character in the comics by the name of Chemical who is a parody of Amazo from DC Comics, and he turns himself into a deadly gas, and so all Butcher does is lights a lighter and blows him up. Or like when they meet the parody of Daredevil, all they do is take out his legs and thus he's no longer a threat. So powers are not always needed, but they do help explain away why the boys have so many victories under their belt. A question that Huey asked in the comics is, in the mix of battle, who I know to fight and who I know not to fight. This is where the leather jackets come in that the boys are known for wearing. Butcher explains that they wear these jackets so that they can tell the difference between a friend and an enemy. However, in the show, Butcher's the only one to wear a leather jacket, similar to how they wear one in the comics. So I guess in the show it's more of a fashion statement rather than having a sensible reason to actually wear it. Okay, let's talk about the character of Becca Butcher. I didn't mention her in the character section of the video because the character is quite a conundrum considering the fact that she's the sole reason why Butcher decided to go around killing superheroes in the first place. So in the comic book, Becca does get raped by not Homelander, which leads to her dying when a superpowered fetus claws its way out of her stomach, and Butcher does kill it before it can cause any more harm. In the show, however, the plot twist at the end of season 1 was that Becca is in fact alive, and so is the child. For you see, in the show version of events, after Becca was sexually assaulted, she goes off missing and seeking help to deliver Homelander's baby. And that's it, she's just been missing this whole time. Her family presumed that maybe she is just dead, hence the tombstone, but no, she's just been on this secret VOT facility raising her child as a single mom. And the thing is, there isn't enough evidence to support the fact that Butcher would follow the same route that he did in the comics here in the show. To give you some perspective here, this is how things went down in the comic book. After not Homelander had his way with Butcher's wife, Becca is awfully distant towards Butcher because she had this really horrible thing happen to her, but she doesn't feel like she can talk to him about it because she knows how Butcher is and doesn't want him to do anything that's gonna result in him getting himself killed. So one night while Becca and Butcher are sleeping, the fetus inside of Becca claws its way out of her womb, killing her in the process and waking Butcher up, and Butcher is just like, what the fuck? And he kills the thing quick, fast, and in a hurry because it does have laser beams and super strength, and it did kill his wife. And soon after that, Butcher is scooped up by these VOT American goons who are trying to keep everything hush-hush because VOT American looks out for its assets. Butcher basically tells them to piss off, which leads him to being put in prison where he meets Mallory. Mallory being the one to give Butcher Becca's diary, in which he talks about how not Homelander forced himself onto her and how she didn't feel like she could tell Butcher because, again, he's just gonna go out and do something stupid. And upon having the context as to what exactly happened with Becca, Butcher is furious. He is ready to pop heads and take names. victims. And Mallory explains that he wants to put together a team that's capable of taking on the Supes, hence the formation of the boys. Now in the show, Becca gets raped and she goes missing. And the only evidence that we have to her being raped is a little video that Greg's Anatomy shows Butcher of Becca and Homelander going into the same room together, and Becca coming out with her hair all down and her clothes all messed up and she's not wearing her shoes right. And that's it. That's the only implication that we have that she was sexually assaulted. And the thing is, that's not how rape victims act after being molested. Some of them are too afraid to even move after something like that happens to them. Some of them will end up breaking down and crying when they do try to get up again. Speaking in chronological terms here, from Butcher's point of view, what is there to say that this was a non-consensual act? Because if I was in his shoes, my first thought would be, oh my god, my wife is having an affair with Homelander. Now this all ties into the origin of Billy Butcher as far as how he got indoctrinated into the boys. And unlike the comic book, that right there just felt super fucking lazy. Now maybe eventually they will tell Butcher's origin story properly on the show, because there is more to tell than just that, but I have my doubts. But yeah, Becca being a rape victim was just super unbelievable given the context, or rather lack thereof. I mean, yeah, Becca was in fact raped by Homelander. That is the correct answer. I just wish they had done a better job of connecting the dots is all. But moving on, let's talk about the incident with the plane, cause boy is there a lot to talk about. So in the show, a plane gets hijacked, and Madeline Stillwell sends out Homelander and Queen Maeve to try to stop the hijacking and save the passengers to show why superheroes should be in the military. So Homelander and Queen Maeve get to the plane, take care of the hijackers, and at first it seems like everything is going aces. That is until Queen Maeve discovers that there is one more hijacker in the cockpit who kills the flyer, and Homelander in response kills the hijacker with his heat vision, but also damages the controls in the process. Upon realizing that there's nothing they can do to save the plane, Homelander opts for them to leave, and Queen Maeve reluctantly agrees. So the plane goes down and everybody dies. In the comics, however, things are a bit worse than that. So you remember in the show how they made you think that Queen Maeve and Homelander had saved the day at first? Yeah, in the comic book there was no such luxury. It was a complete clusterfuck from start to finish. This originally took place during 9/11 with the hijacked planes that were going to crash into the Twin Towers. In this iteration of events, the US Air Force successfully shot down all of the hijacked planes but one because they're told to stand down by Vic the Veep, who of course is in Vought American's pocket. Now you're probably thinking, well, if Vic the Veep is the vice president, how can he tell the US military to stand down? Well, Vic the Veep knocked Dakota Bob, who was the president at the time, out with a fire extinguisher so that he could take control of this operation. And in doing so sends in not only Homelander and Queen Maeve, but the entirety of the Seven, which of course features Homelander, Queen Maeve, Jack from Jupiter, Black Noir, Lamplighter, The Deep, and Mr. Marathon, who was the acting speeder of the team at the time. And things immediately go haywire as The Deep gets hit dead center with the nose of the plane, Lamplighter gets hit with the wing of the plane, and both of those characters were carrying Black Noir, who supposedly cannot fly, so he falls all the way down to the ocean. So out the bat, 3 out of 7 of the 7 are out of commission. And when they actually do reach the plane, they open up the door and a little boy flies out of the plane, who apparently nobody cared to catch, but okay. But anyway, Queen Maeve and Homelander get on the plane, and everybody's freaking out because of the situation at hand, and Homelander, not being able to handle all the noise, tells everybody to shut the fuck up so loud that he ends up bursting everybody's eardrums. Mr. Marathon makes it on the plane as well, and Jack from Jupiter just decides to up and leave. He thinks it's a lost cause, so he flies away. Much like in the show, Homelander successfully kills all the hijackers, but at the expense of the airplane's controls. And so, with no other course of action, Homelander says fuck this and decides to leave. Queen Maeve tries to stop him only to get bitch slapped to the side, and Mr. Marathon manages to latch on to Homelander right before he takes off. Now you remember in the show where Maeve suggests that Homelander rammed the plane, and Homelander's like, no, I might just punch straight through it? Well, in the comic book, that is exactly what happens. Homelander tries to ram into the plane to at the very least take it off course from the city, only to go straight through the plane, snapping it in two, and inadvertently killing Mr. Marathon in the process. Queen Maeve had to cart through multiple passengers just to escape, moments before the remainder of the plane crashed into and destroyed the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, me personally, I prefer the comic book version of events over the show version of events, because it shows in the comic just how incompetent superheroes are, even when they're trying to do the right thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, Homelander in the show fucked up as well, but as you saw, they almost had it. They almost won the day. okay, up until they got to the cockpit and found out there was one more hijacker, and that to me felt more like a misstep than a misfire like it was in the comic. Because in the comic, the Seven had no business being there, and they did way more damage than what they would have done had they just destroyed the plane whole. Like, they got civilians killed, giving more gravitas to the fact that superpowered beings need to be put in check. But anyway, let's talk about the Lamplighter incident and the subsequent ceasefire between the boys and the Seven. In the comics, during the original iteration of the boys ran by Greg Mallory, it actually took a while before the boys actually had a confrontation with the Seven. The boys would actually go after a lot smaller fish in the superhero community, building up to eventually take on the Seven. And one day the boys do get photos from an anonymous source, wink wink, of Homelander killing people in brutal fashion, and so Butcher sees this as an opportunity to finally take the Seven down because they already know about the 9/11 incident in which Homelander got a lot of people killed. And so Butcher talks Mallory into setting up a meeting with the Seven where they're threatening to release this information unless Vought American keeps the superheroes out of national defense as well as give up the Homelander. And things seem to be going in the boys' favor, all except for one thing. Lamplighter felt very disrespected and didn't understand why these supposedly ordinary people were giving them all this shit since he believes that they are so far above ordinary people with them being superheroes. And so he uses the solar flare technique on the Seven and flies off to do his own thing because in the comic book version he can fly. Lamplighter went to stalk Colonel Mallory back at his place, and while Mallory was taking his daughter out to dinner, Lamplighter burned Mallory's grandchildren alive as an act of revenge. This led to another meeting with the Seven and the boys, and having the two teams come to a truce of sorts. Now while Vought American was not willing to give up Homelander at that point, they would stop trying to get the superheroes in the government, at least for now, and in return the boys would leave the Seven alone. The Seven were also willing to give up Lamplighter to the boys to do with as they wish, due to him being insubordinate. Afterwards, Lamplighter does get killed in brutal fashion by Mallory, and the boys end up disbanding, with Greg Mallory hating Billy Butcher because Butcher pushed him into taking more direct action when it came to the Seven, and Billy Butcher hating Greg Mallory because Mallory had promised Butcher the Homelander for 15 years, and now here they are simply giving up the fight. A fight that Butcher would continue years later with the new iteration of the boys that features Huey. Now in the show version of events, when Mallory was running the team, they never met the full Seven, they just met up with Lamplighter. But they don't have much to use as leverage against the Seven or even Homelander, for the 9/11 incident does not exist on the TV show. I mean, it kind of does, but it doesn't, and it doesn't take place at this particular point in time. And there's nothing that they have to use against Homelander, it's just stuff that they have to use against Lamplighter, which is never really explained, but the implication is it's something that Lamplighter does not want to get out into the public. And so Mallory is blackmailing him to basically be a mole for the boys within the Seven, bringing them back information and stuff of that nature. And again, the implication is that this isn't really Mallory's idea, it's Butcher's, hence the animosity between the two in real time, because much like in the comic, Lamplighter does not take this level of disrespect lying down and burns Greg's Anatomy's grandchildren to death. Now in the show, it's stated that Lamplighter didn't mean to kill the grandkids like he did in the comic, and he was trying to kill Mallory instead. Which I don't know if that was the showrunners trying to get us to care about Lamplighter or not, because that doesn't absolve him of anything. Like, he still went there with the intent of murdering somebody. I mean, murder is still murder. It doesn't matter who you're murdering, it's still wrong. Like, guys, not every single character is gonna have some layers of depth to them. Sometimes an asshole is just an asshole and that's it. But anyway, that's the reason why the boys break up in the show. It's similar to what happened in the comic, it's just the comic was way better. And Lamplighter was still alive after the incident, working in that superhuman hospital for Stormfront. So let me explain what happens there. In the show, we learned that Stormfront was using this facility to experiment with Compound V as a means to try to perfect the formula so that way they would always come out with a perfect soup as opposed to some random freak. Now I believe this is supposed to be an homage to the hospital that was used in the comic when the female was beaten into a coma by Stormfront. You see, in the comic, Stormfront and his team Payback were used by Vought American as a means to capture each member of the boys, and the female was used as bait to lure the other members of the boys out. Also, the female was the one to claw out Stormfront's eye, not some random knife throw. Just thought I'd point that out. But anyway, Stormfront and his team ambush the boys and a fight ensues. Eventually everyone gets separated save for for Billy Butcher and the members of Payback. Butcher is able to temporarily get rid of Stormfront by throwing glass in his one remaining eye, and not wanting to be blind, Stormfront flies away to take the glass out, leaving Butcher with the remaining members of Payback. And Butcher kills each one of them one at a time, save for Soldier Boy, who he keeps alive just long enough to tell him who sent them after the boys. Now there is a fight between Stormfront and the boys in the comic, but in the show, it's the girls that fight Stormfront because girl power and bullshit. So in the show, Stormfront faces off against Starlight, the Female, and Queen Maeve, who happen to show up out of nowhere, even though, like I said, she cannot fly. So how she got there was anyone's guess. And they basically take the moment that the boys had in the comic book where they fight Stormfront. And the thing is, they don't even defeat her. She flies away. And what makes this moment even worse is that Stormfront doesn't even attempt to rain lightning down on them when she's the only one in that matchup that can fly. So what do you know? I guess girls can't get it done after all. In the comic book, Stormfront's orders is to capture the boys, not kill them, which is why he's not murdering anybody. And Stormfront is actually defeated with the combined efforts of Billy Butcher, Frenchie, Mother's Milk, and their Russian ally Voss, aka Love Sausage. Voss does make a cameo appearance in the show, though I doubt he's gonna be anything more relevant than that. Especially considering the thing that he does with his thing. But anyway, yeah, in the comic book, they whoop Stormfront's butt clean. Whereas in the show, she had to be defeated by Ryan, Homelander's son. A person by definition should be the weakest person there, at least in terms of superpowers. He just up and fries Stormfront, and that's the end of her. And I guess this would be a good time to segue into how inconsistent powers work in this show. So let's start off with Stormfront's defeat by Ryan, shall we? The reason why they chose to show Ryan uses heat vision off screen is because the scene in question doesn't make a whole lot of sense. For starters, we've seen that Stormfront can survive heat vision pretty well, back when her and Homelander were having their little love scene. Now, one thing that I keep hearing bring up is that Homelander was holding back, therefore he didn't seriously harm Stormfront in any significant way. Which granted, yes, that probably is the case, that Homelander was in fact holding back. I mean, we did see him heat up a bottle of milk without destroying the bottle, so I'll give you that one. However, for Ryan's first time using heat vision, he should not have done this much damage. In fact, I know he couldn't have done this much damage. Like guys, he burns off all of her limbs and fries half of her face. The half that wasn't even facing him when he used his heat vision. I mean, her other side does get burnt too, but not nearly to the degree of her right side. But ignoring that logical error for now, how the fuck does he do all this devastation to Stormfront, but Becca, however, has her neck sliced as though from a knife? Like, you can't tell me that his heat vision is both exact and like an out of control fire hose at the same time. Now, some people have tried to stretch this and say that Ryan's heat vision started at Stormfront's hand, and that's how he inadvertently killed Becca, but it finished off with Stormfront. And that don't fly, McFly, because there is no way that Ryan's attack is gonna have Becca bleeding profusely from her neck, meanwhile Stormfront is burnt to a crisp. You can't even really follow the trail of the heat vision either, because when Ryan uses his heat vision, he is facing Stormfront's right, yet somehow manages to do more damage to the left. Also, how is he gonna injure Stormfront to this degree, but do absolutely no damage to the surrounding area whatsoever? Seriously, there's no fire, there's not even any scorch marks. That force looks good for somebody who just decimated somebody else with laser eyes. Also, why on earth is Stormfront's body nowhere around Becca after she got blasted? I mean, Becca is all the way over here, Stormfront is all the way over there, and I'm just like, how? I mean, if you really want to sell the point that Ryan accidentally killed his mom when he used his powers, maybe have Stormfront's body anywhere around Becca instead of having it be like a city block away? I mean, Jesus wept, man. At least try to make it make sense. Another example of inconsistent powers is when the Seven are in the sewers chasing down the boys. Now, you have the Deep outside mourning over a whale. Starlight doesn't really want to hurt anybody. Queen Maeve doesn't give a damn either way. So excluding them, you have 4 committed members who are tracking down the boys. There's Homelander, Stormfront, Black Noir, and A-Train. A-Train tries to use his powers to track down the boys but can't because it exasperates separates his heart condition. Keep that in mind because that'll be important later. But for now, I'll give him a pass. Black Noir is stated to be faster than a car, yet we don't see him trying to move fast when it comes to catching the boys. But then again, maybe they are trying to do some variant of the Homelander Black Noir twist on the show, so I'll give him a pass. Stormfront doesn't seem like she has exact flight or even super speed, so I'll even give her a pass. For now anyway, because we're not done talking about her. But the one person that I cannot cut any slack on in this scene is Homelander, because Homelander has a whole array of powers that could help him catch the boys lickety-split. I mean, he's the one that wants to catch them most of all, but for some reason just doesn't. So let's go over the powers he could have used. He could use his X-ray vision. He could use his super hearing. He could use his super speed. All options that he has readily available, but instead we're just gonna move all slowly and hopefully stumble upon them eventually. Great job, show. Great job. Getting back on Stormfront though, there are several times in which Stormfront uses her lightning powers to electrocute somebody, primarily a member of the boys, and I'm not talking about Kimiko, I mean the literal boys of the team, and it's nothing but a minor inconvenience for them. Like here she is using her powers on Huey, Frenchie, and Mother's Milk, and they're just fine. Here she is using her powers on Butcher, and he's just fine. Hell, one time she tosses a whole van in the air with Ryan, Becca, and Mother's Milk inside, and they're just fine. Ryan's understandable because he's invulnerable, obviously, but Mother's Milk and especially Becca should have been dead in that instance. But somehow, by the good mercy of God, they all live. And my final example when talking about inconsistent powers in the boys would be A-Train. So we all know A-Train, he's the speedy guy on the team. He runs fast, except when his heart condition starts acting up, or to be more precise, when the plot doesn't need him to go fast like that time in the sewer. And because of this, you would think that he doesn't do much running now. However, towards the end of season 2 of The Boys, not only is he able to run, he's able to run at such controlled speed that he can go all across the city, find Huey and Starlight, open the car door without tearing it the fuck off, get inside the car, close the door, and scare the shit out of Starlight and Huey. And yet his heart is just fine. It's almost like his whole heart condition thing is just a plot device and not actually a condition at all.
How did you find us?
Please. I can cover the boroughs in like 3 hours. I went looking. That's all.
Surprised your heart can take it.
My heart is just fine.
And while they do acknowledge in the same scene that he does have a heart condition, it's not an excuse for why he's still able to function as though he doesn't have one. But let's talk about this scene for a little bit, right? So A-Train has files on Stormfront's past that if they were to get out into the public, they could ruin her career. So he gives these files to Starlight and Huey so that they can leak it online and do just that. And I'm thinking, why doesn't he just do it himself? I mean, if his heart really isn't that big of a problem, there's a million ways of how he could get away with it and not get it traced back to him. So needless to say, it really doesn't make any sense. Now you guys are probably wondering why I spend so much time on that, and the reason is because The Boys is a comic that prides itself on having superheroes in a realistic setting, so there has to be a realistic level of cause and effect if you're going to do an adaptation on the comic book run. But half the time, cause and effect seems somewhat secondary when it comes to the show. So for example, and probably one of the biggest examples you'll see when it comes to the show is blackmail. Like when Starlight is being blackmailed by the Deep in order to give him a blowjob, I couldn't help but think to myself that she has options in which she could take in order to not do that. And I know some people are going to be like, well, Starlight is very naive to how the world actually is, and you're not wrong about that, but there's a very big difference between Starlight from the comics and Starlight in the show. Comic book Starlight was very bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and bubbly, but show Starlight is a lot more headstrong and willing to stand up for herself. Like, she isn't pushover Starlight like how she was in the comic book. Having said that, why didn't she tell Homelander or Madeline Stillwell or just outright quit if that's what it's gonna take to be a part of the Seven? I mean, if your answer was the Deep was gonna blackmail her by claiming that she had attacked him, well, I'm sorry, but that just doesn't hold up under scrutiny. For starters, the only evidence that the Deep would have that Starlight attacked him in any way is the cracked monitor, but there's no damage on the Deep himself, nor do I think he has it in him to purposefully harm himself, all for the sake of a blowjob. Also, I'm sure there are some cameras in that place that are recording recording everything in that room 24/7, so couldn't you just go back and check on those? In the comic book, the Deep isn't the one to force her to do this. This is done by Homelander, Black Noir, and A-Train. And since Homelander of all people was forcing her to do this, it makes sense that she didn't go to anybody because, again, it's Homelander and he's seen as the best of all superheroes. And obviously James Stillwell wouldn't care, so there you go. And again, Starlight is more impressionable in the comic book than how she is in the show. So the show version of events didn't make much sense to me. But another example of Blackmail not making sense in the show is when A-Train catches Starlight smuggling some Compound V. Starlight plans to use this Compound V to expose to the public that superheroes are not born but made by Vought. But A-Train intercepts her and says, "Nah, you ain't pulling no shenanigans today, Starlight." To which Starlight is like, "Actually I am, because you killed your girlfriend Popclaw. I for some reason decided to look at the forensics report on her death and have concluded that only you could have killed her." Thus, Starlight gets away with what she was trying to do. To which A-Train is like, "Damn, if only I could turn this around on you somehow." Only he could have turned it around on her somehow. Now just hear me out, alright? The Seven know that the boys are actively trying to destroy them. The Seven also know that Little Miss Annie January, aka Starlight, has been in constant contact with Huey, who is a member of the boys. Now if A-Train was actually thinking, he could have been like, "You know what, Starlight? You actually killed Popclaw. I mean, you're fucking Huey on the side, one of the guys who's actively trying to kill us. You have super strength, so you very well could have shattered Popclaw's bone with the needles, and now you're here smuggling Compound V. You know what, I'm gonna tell Homelander." And then boom, check and mate. Starlight is done. But no, he just has to be incompetent. So let's move on to our next example of terrible blackmailing, that being when Homelander gets blackmailed at the end of the second season by Queen Maeve, who somehow happened to conveniently show up at the exact right moment in time. So Queen Maeve is threatening to expose Homelander for the fraud he is by showing footage of Homelander leaving the people on the plane to die. Unless Homelander leaves everybody alone, which Homelander's like, well, okay, you got me there. Now, call me crazy, but there are a few things wrong with that. First of all, in the midst of everybody getting ready to die, in the midst of coming to the realization that you guys are not going to be able to save these people, how in the hell is Queen Maeve going to notice that somebody was recording on their camera phone? I mean, I consider myself a pretty observant and analytical fellow, but this bitch could put Sherlock Holmes to shame with what she notices. Another thing, how in the hell is that footage still good when it's been submerged underwater all this time? Because keep in mind, Queen Maeve didn't have the plan to use the footage against Homelander until the middle of the second season. And the plane went down the middle of the first season, so between all that time, how on earth is anything from that phone usable, let alone camera footage? But even if I'm willing to overlook that, Homelander still had options. Queen Maeve's demands are leave her alone, leave Starlight alone, leave the boys alone, or else I'm gonna release this footage to the public. And the camera footage is the only bit of leverage that Queen Maeve has, so Homelander could have easily overpowered her and vaporized the phone, and boom, problem solved. Or if you want to believe that Homelander believed that maybe Queen Maeve has the same footage elsewhere, all he would have had to do was say, okay, look, this is how things are really gonna work. I'm gonna kill Butcher and his crew, including Starlight, and I'm gonna take my son and leave. But I'll leave you and Elena alone. Release that footage, and she dies too. That should have been an easy win, but because men are written to be incompetent in this show, this play just happens to work. You see, one of the major problems with this show is that it does not have a good grasp of cause and effect. Things in the show will just happen with little to no build-up, leading to a piss-poor payoff. Lastly, I would like to talk about the wokeness that is infecting this show. Now, there are some people out there that'll say, the boys ain't woke, what you talking about? Well, allow me to explain, my good sir, and maybe you'll see things in a different light. So firstly, we already have the race swapping and gender swapping in the show. That seems to be the norm when it comes to any show or movie nowadays. But two characters that got race swapped really caught my eye in this show. So the first one is Father Ezekiel from the Belief event. Now, in the comics, there is not a character by the name of Father Ezekiel, but it's very clear to me that he's supposed to be a stand-in for O-Father, a crooked pastor soup in the boys' comic book, and it's implied that he likes to get a little too friendly with the children, if you know what I mean. Now, in the show, he's not a child molester, but he is a hypocrite claiming to believe in the Christian faith, yet he's the gayest motherfucker around. The second character that caught my eye was the fact that they changed the Deep from a black person to a white person in the show. And of course, he's also the one who blackmails Starlight into giving him a blowjob. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because it is very rare to find characters getting whitewashed in today's social climate unless they are made out to be an evil piece of shit. Hence, Ezekiel and the Deep, respectively. This show would not have the balls to have these characters do the things that they have done and still be black. And before somebody comes out saying, "Oh, but there are black characters that are evil though, what you talking about?" You're right, my condescending subject, but let me break it down for you. You see, a character like A-Train does do fucked up shit, but it's very clear that the show wants you to care about him in some capacity, and he's probably even gonna have a redemption arc or something somewhere down the line. Whereas the Deep is not a character you're meant to care about. He isn't going through any type of redemption arc. Everything that he did in the second season was for him to get back into 7 and live his luxury lifestyle. But with A-Train, they definitely want him to be more of a complex character. Now, in terms of Black Noir, sure, he does bad things too, but he's primarily just following orders, with supposedly no real ambition of his own, but again, the jury's still out on that. And Stan Edgar, while again a bad person, is for the most part just a corrupt businessman. It isn't like he's a rapist or a guy who's claiming to be Christian while sucking off other dudes. He's just doing whatever it takes to make that dollar. And this isn't me exonerating these characters of their evil deeds, but it's very clear that the show does not want these characters to be on the same level of despicable as the Deep and Father Ezekiel. But maybe that's just me. Moving on. For a show called The Boys, absolutely nothing would get done in this show without the female characters at the helm. Now in season 1, it wasn't as bad. I mean, you did have things like them gender swapping characters just for the sake of having strong female representation, and of course the prominent gay woman character, because why not? But it wasn't too terrible in the first season. Season 2, however, took things a little too far. For starters, the character of Starlight has become a much more prominent character, which wouldn't be a bad thing if the boys themselves could get more accomplished on their own. As I said before, in the comics, Starlight is not a super important character outside of dating Huey and giving us some insight as to what it means to be a member of the superhero community ran by Vought American. Here in the show, however, nothing would get done without her presence, and I mean nothing. Because keep in mind, unlike the comic book, the boys are not getting government backing for what they're doing, so they're basically flying off the seat of their pants. So the only real connection that they have to facing off against the superheroes is Starlight. Oh, and she's the only member that can fight too, because again, the members of the boys, minus Kimiko, do not have powers. So thank God we got a strong, independent woman, otherwise the boys would be fucked. Girls get it done, as they say. And speaking of which, let's talk about that. So because half of the members of the 7 are female, Vought decides that they're going to promote female representation with the tagline, "Girls get it done." And the thing that I wanted to talk about was not that necessarily, that is woke mind you, but what I did want to talk about was how people, particularly speaking fans of the show, try to say that the show does such a good job at making fun of the woke and political issues, and I'm just like, how? Because clearly people like that and me have two different senses of humor. Like, I constantly keep hearing people say things like it makes for such good parody or satire, but there is no mockery here, there is no punchline. They are simply doing the exact same thing we are seeing in real life in their show. So when they're continuously promoting female representation or LGBT stuff or whatnot, it's not a joke, it's literally the exact same thing that you're seeing nowadays. Like, making fun of woke would be like in that one scene in Invincible where Doc Seismic is talking to Adam Eve about her costume and talking about how, man, whoever designed your costume stuck to traditional gender roles, to which Eve replies, "I made this costume myself." That is an example of making fun of wokeness, because Doc Seismic was being ridiculous and Adam Eve called him out on it. Now whether that was intentional or not, I don't know, but that's an example of poking fun at wokeness. The same cannot be said for the Boys TV show. Here in this show, they are perfectly paralleling what is going on in modern times, but let's be clear, there is no comedy here. You can tell when the show is and is not trying to be funny, and this is not them trying to be funny. I mean, if you have to self-justify it to yourself, then by all means you do you, but I can see the show clearly for what it is. And speaking of seeing things clearly, let's talk about Femfront, because man, do I have a few things to say about her. So the first thing we notice about Femfront is that, of course, it couldn't be a male like it was in the comics. No, you have to be a female because men are the devil and women are righteous. But then people are asking her all this woke nonsense and stuff, and she's rebuttaling it, like she's spitting out all this anti-SJW rhetoric, and I'm thinking to myself, that's different. I mean, she's out of line, but she's right. But then it hit me like a ton of motherfucking bricks. Like I had the biggest galaxy brain moment of all time. Okay, so stay with me here. Stormfront was out there being very anti-SJW. Stormfront is also a Nazi. I too am against SJW wokeness, and what do people call people like me all the time? Nazis. It's almost like they made her a conservative or something. And man, when I first discovered that, I just burst burst out laughing because you know they were trying to be slick with that shit. Man, y'all know that scene in Goodfellas where Spider tells Tommy to go fuck himself because he shot him in the foot earlier on? And Jimmy actually put some respect on his name. He was like, you know what, Spider, just for that, I'm gonna tip you an extra big one, man. That's for you, just for having the balls. That's the guy I wanted to be. I wanted to be Jimmy so bad. I wanted to be Jimmy, but I had to be Tommy. Fuck this show, man. Oh, and let's not forget the fight with Femfront, in which all the male members of the boys were just completely fucking useless. Even Becca did more damage to Femfront than any of the members of the boys, again, not including the female. Seriously, they should just retitle the show The Girls with the tagline, "Only girls get shit done." Oh, and let's not forget how the show likes to attack Christianity, because out of all the religions out there, Christianity is made out to be the worst one for some reason. Now, as a Christian myself, I can't help but take that just a little bit personally. Like, don't get me wrong, there definitely are crooked churches and crooked pastors out there that do take advantage of people's faith on a regular, but that's no excuse to paint the entire religion as bad, evil, or hypocritical. Yes, Annie does lose faith in Christianity in the comics because of all the shit she has to put up with the Seven, but there's a difference between somebody losing faith and subtly saying fuck faith. Now, there are a lot more examples of how the show is woke outside of what I just listed off. These were just some of the more blatant examples. And before I end this video, I would like to say that while I do hate all of the changes that they make from the comic to the show, I can understand why certain things were done in a certain way, because there are a few controversial and sensitive topics within the comic, such as the 9/11 incident, as well as certain things that would be seen as quote-unquote dated in today's day and age. And while I can understand certain changes to the source material, I cannot condone them forsaking the source material almost altogether. Like, this show is basically its own original thing with occasional winks and nods to the comic. None of the characters are like how they are in the comics. Badasses became dumbasses. They want you to give a damn about every single character in this show, despite the fact that some of these characters are just straight up irredeemable. The story is only held together by the duct tape known as contrivance. It's woke as a goddamn joke. Guys, I'm calling it. I am giving The Boys TV show, seasons 1 and 2, a total adaptation fail, 0 out of 10. If you like The Boys, hey, go on liking it. But the only reason I would watch any more of this shit is for you guys. So if you want me to talk about the third season, I will. If not, I'll move on. But let me know what you guys think. Do you guys love The Boys TV show? Do you hate it? What are your thoughts and opinions? As always, support your emperor by leaving a like and clicking subscribe. Also, follow me on these social media platforms. You wouldn't want to commit treason now, would you?